I know I said buckle up on Monday, but I'm going to maybe invoke the airbags today because we have brand new reporting on what the New York Times describes as the, quote, roadmap for retribution. It's an executive order cloaked in Orwellian doublespeak that could lay the groundwork for prosecutions of Biden administration officials and Trump's political critics. The Times reports this of the order titled Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government. Quote, Trump's new executive order directs the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence to investigate the previous administration's actions with the aim of unearthing political bias in the agencies they oversee, as well as in others, like the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Trade Commission. They will then report back to the White House, quote, with recommendations for appropriate remedial actions. Now, what this amounts to is an attempt to put Trump's words to paper and action.
But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department.
I think the people know it's a political persecution. It's a political hoax. They've weaponized the Justice Department. They've weaponized the FBI.
That is just a minuscule fraction of the times that Donald Trump has alleged that the government was weaponized against him. He said it over and over and over and over again without ever presenting a single scrap of evidence. In light of all that, the outcome of the search for political bias appears to be preordained by Donald Trump, and this executive order is just part of a series of actions intended to punish critics, to silence them, and to embolden and empower his allies. More from the Times reporting, quote, they included a highly unusual separate order that stripped the security clearances of dozens of former intelligence officials whom Trump has viewed as his political enemies. Another order gave the White House authority to grant immediate top-secret security clearance to any official for up to 6 months, circumventing the traditional background process managed by the FBI and the intelligence community. It also includes stripping Secret Service protection for John Bolton. He's Trump's former national security advisor turned fervent critic. Bolton has been the target of death threats from Iran. In a statement, Bolton said this, quote, I am disappointed but not surprised that Trump has made this decision, notwithstanding my criticisms of President Biden's national security policies. He nonetheless made the decision to once again extend Secret Service protection to me in 2021. The Justice Department filed criminal charges against an Iranian Revolutionary Guard official in 2022 for attempting to hire a hitman to target me. That threat remains today, as also demonstrated by the recent arrest of someone trying to arrange for Trump's own assassination. The American people can judge for themselves which president made the right call. That's just one of the many ways that we know about that Team Trump plans to strike at their critics. New York Times reports this, quote, even where the internal inquiries ordered by Trump do not lead to investigations or prosecutions, they could yield information that he could use to publicly criticize or harass federal workers or officials he perceives as enemies, a practice he employed regularly during his first term and appears to be continuing. The New York Times describes the building blocks of the retribution campaign as, quote, payback dressed up in the language of victimhood. And no single MAGA fellow traveler exemplifies that better than at this moment, than the newly pardoned leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio. Listen to him.
We went through hell, and I'm going to tell you, it was worth it, because what we stood for and what those guys stood for was what we've been fighting for and what we saw yesterday on the inauguration stage. We need people like Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and the rest of Trump's cabinet to right all these wrongs. Well, now it's our turn. Now it's our turn. I'm happy that the president's focusing not on retribution and focusing on success, but I will tell you that I'm not going to play by those rules. The people who did this, they need to feel the heat. They need to be put behind bars, and they need to be prosecuted.
Donald Trump laying the groundwork to turn the executive branch into a personal political weapon is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. New York Times Washington investigative correspondent Mark Mazzetti's here, one of the reporters bylined on that reporting we read from. Also joining us, Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Justice Department, now an MSNBC legal analyst. Mary McCord is here. She's the co-host of the podcast Main Justice, along with Andrew Weissman, a former top official at the Department of Justice, also an MSNBC legal analyst. Mark Mazzetti, the reporting that you and your colleague Mike Schmidt have in the paper today is, I guess John Bolton captures it, right? Disturbing but not surprising, or harrowing but not a shock. Talk about what it means, the sort of policy direction that has now been greenlit and unearthed for the Department of Justice.
Well, I think one of the things that you're seeing from these executive orders is that this is a much more carefully thought out plan to go after potential enemies than was carried out in the first Trump term. As you recall, there were these haphazard efforts. Trump would tweet about the FBI, efforts by, Congressman Devin Nunes to investigate so-called political bias, eventually leading up to the Durham investigation, which didn't conclude on President Trump's political timetable. This time around, from day one from the Oval Office, these executive orders show a plan not only to sort of root out what they see as bias, but also to send a message and also to test the loyalty of people in the intelligence agencies, in the Justice Department. And so these things are all kind of a piece, and it shows that they've thought this out for some time and plan to act on it.
Mark, what is the inclusion of the DNI and the edict that she investigate her agency for bias? What is that about? What is that rooted in? What is Trump's perceived grievance there?
Well, a lot of this goes back really to the very beginning, right? This view that not only in the Justice Department, but also in the intelligence agencies, there's this so-called deep state of anti-Trump sentiment that is trying to undermine his agenda, right? That this exists in the CIA, in other intelligence agencies, and this needs to be rooted out. I should add, of course, that this also is perceived to exist at the National Security Council. You recall in the first term, the NSC detailees from the CIA, the Pentagon, et cetera, were kind of seen as the locus of anti-Trump support, and many of the key witnesses of the first impeachment about Ukraine, right? So you see a lot of the NSC detailees today getting sent home. And so the executive order Monday night about the security clearances, which was basically we can give anyone a clearance who we want, in part is a way to get what they see as their own people into the White House and the NSC, and rooting out the career people because they're seen as, many of them are seen as disloyal. So these are all part of a plan, and it's all of a piece.
I mean, Mary, there were no enemies of Donald Trump's at the Department of Justice or the FBI or the CIA. There were people who were loyal to U.S. national security objectives, to congressionally approved military aid for U.S. allies, to the facts and the truth. And I wonder what it means that the order adopts the language of politicization in such an inverted manner.
Well, I mean, it's not surprising given everything that Donald Trump said during the, during the campaign. But it is a little bit ironic that sort of the title is about ending weaponization, and the mechanism for apparently ending it is to actually engage in weaponization of the Department of Justice, or at least that seems to be the intent here. To your question about the career men and women of the Department of Justice and of our intelligence community, these are mission-oriented people who, like you said, their allegiance is to the Constitution, rule of law, protecting national security, and they are very apolitical. I mean, I've worked with law enforcement, prosecutors, national security officials, intelligence community for decades within the Department of Justice, and rarely did I have any idea what political party my colleagues even were members of. It just was not something discussed. Many of us who'd been there for long, long times had worked under Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, and it didn't change the mission, right? The mission was to protect national security and to do so in a way that protects also constitutional rights that are so fundamental to America. So everything that he's suggesting doing in this executive order just sort of turns that on its head. I'll note also that it also shows you that any independence, between the Department of Justice and the White House, things that we've talked about on other shows of yours, seems to be gone, because he's not asking for a review by the Attorney General and a report to the Attorney General so that the Attorney General can make recommendations. He's asking for a review by the Attorney General and a report to him so that he can decide what he wants to direct the Department of Justice to do. And similarly with the intelligence community. So this is not the only executive order that actually directs conduct by the Department of Justice. The direction to dismiss cases against all of the January 6th attackers, the pending cases, people who were not pardoned or had their sentences commuted, that was also a direct order to the Department of Justice. So I agree with Mike. All of this is part of a much bigger plan.